Hi, good evening, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our practitioner series. Today, we are going to take a deep look, a practitioner's look at the multi-cap space. Multi-caps have been in the news for the right reasons and for the wrong reasons. In any case, our focus in the practitioner series is to understand from the best in the profession. And we have today perhaps the best, if not the best, in multi-cap investing, Atul Bhole. Atul was, many of you may know, he was adjudged as the best fund manager in calendar 2019 by Outlook, and recently again in FY20 as FY20 came to close. If some of you may have read his bio, he's really a veteran, very experienced. He's covered multiple sectors and he's worked in the treasury side too, an experience that he really relishes. I'm sure we are going to enjoy his talk. He's got a very comprehensive presentation that covers the 3 learning outcomes on today's talk. A few housekeeping instructions. The webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes, including Q&A. Try to ask really tough questions, but keep them on the conceptual side of things. I have reached out to some of you for questions, and thank you so much for sending those questions in. We will, in the Q&A, we'll have a special slot for the Q&A unless something arises during the presentation. But do submit the questions in the Q&A link and not in the chat box. The webinar presentation will be available after the presentation concludes. Harshad will be posting the presentation link in the chat box. You'll find the presentation to be very interesting and as a good reference material as well. We really value your feedback, so do complete the evaluation survey, and more than that, reach out to us, as some of you do, to let us know of the speakers you like, the topics you would like to cover. With that, without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Atul. Atul, over to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Srinivas. Thanks for the opportunity given by the CFA Institute to us, and thanks for the introduction. And good evening, everybody. Actually, when Srinivas and Mr. Anil Ghelani, many of you would be knowing him, they approached me for the presentation. I was a bit confused. As to what to tell this audience. You would be hearing a lot of such presentations through CFA Institute Knowledge Series from maybe veteran investors or academicians, etc. So in that light, I was a bit confused as to what to talk to you. And also, in a sense, the body of knowledge for this equity investing is pretty much written for last 20-30 years, and many people are sort of rewriting it with a lot of innovative words and attractive words, etc. So that was really a struggle for me. So ultimately we came out with this practitioner's insight as to how really a mutual fund manager manages his fund, and particularly last 1.5-2 months, you would be knowing that there's a lot of news about the multi-cap funds after the regulatory changes which are supposed to happen. So I thought this will be a good topic for discussion. Also, though a lot of presentation is applicable for the multi-cap fund, some of the slides are actually common for mutual fund investing. They will be applicable to all other categories as well, like large cap fund, mid cap fund, or maybe even sectoral funds. So that was the background. And if I want to start the presentation now, I will just want to start with a slide which you can see the picture of Mr. Peter Lynch. And you would be knowing he was the fund manager with Fidelity, managing the Magellan Fund, one of the largest fund at that point of time, and still deliver very good CAGR returns over a period of 19-20 years, despite operating in an environment of a mutual fund manager. So basically why I am saying mutual fund manager is slightly different is basically if there is a proprietary investor, he will obviously work with the objective of gaining absolute returns. For that, he might sometimes completely may withdraw from the equity market, and if he want to come, he will come with a portfolio of 3 to 5 stocks or maybe 10 stocks. So his objective is absolute return and protect the wealth. Similarly, if you look at some of the family office managers, and that is a trend which is coming in, the mandate typically they get is basically first conserve the capital which has been built by the first or second generation of the promoters, etc. And on top of that, they want to generate a stable return. So conservatism is a basic sort of mandate there. And the third is basically PMS manager. There are a lot of PMSs are coming. The expectation from the PMS manager is to deliver alpha. So many a times you will see many PMSs go into, say, largely into mid and small categories, or they even go for concentrated portfolios of maybe 20, 30 stocks. So each of these investment avenues or vehicles have different kind of mandates. Though the investing, the way we should approach investment is pretty similar, but the mandates given bring a nuanced approach or requires a nuanced approach. In terms of mutual fund, we manage basically the pooled money of diverse set of customers, and hence the expectations of these customers or the clients would be pretty diverse. Somebody want to build a corpus for retirement, somebody want to build a corpus for a 3-5 year goal like buying a home or a travel, etc. So it can be various, it can vary across client base, and also it comes from the across India or across regions. So we have to keep that in mind. And the point is basically we have to always try to get a better risk reward and not only rewards. So that is the starting point for the mutual fund investment, and hence we have to manage risk first and then hope for returns. And the point is our client base also required a consistent return over a period of time. They don't want a very sort of top of the chart returns, but they want consistent returns. So that aspect also brings a different or requires a different mindset. So in that perspective, I respect this fellow a lot, and I'm actually fortunate to read his books like One Up on the Wall Street or Beating the Street early in my career. And actually, I tried to emulate what he has done in his fund. And at that time, probably US economy was going through a phase of development and all. Similar things we can actually see happening in India at this point of time. So basically, many of my investment decisions are influenced by in a way his thought process also, and actually the outcome has been good. So I respect Mr. Peter Lynch a lot. And the quote I have mentioned, there are obviously many quotes from these three books which you can sort of cull out, but this quote is probably, I thought, is relevant to the existing or the current situation of this COVID pandemic and the monetary experiments going on world over, and the maybe job loss, income loss, and all those sort of things. There is also sort of trade war going on between various countries like China, US, or even EU and US to some extent. So this is basically a big picture for people now. But I think which is not good. Obviously, the near-term big picture is not good. But if you look at this quote, what he's telling is to look at even bigger picture. And when we look at that even bigger picture, we come to know that ultimately mankind has almost sort of overcome this pandemic within just 6 months. We have used liquidity or sort of a very different monetary experiment or policy, but anyway, it has worked. We didn't had a deepening of crisis because of this. I mean, easily companies or financial institutions could have gone bankrupt, but I think because of this concerted efforts of central banks and governments, this has been avoided. So I think whenever such kind of thing happen, I think even bigger picture to should be there in our back of our mind, that we will come out of this, and actually you can use the situation to sort of rebalance your portfolios. Any opportunity like correction or market exuberance or funds coming into the, or money coming into the fund or redemptions, I think for us fund managers, it is a opportunity to rebalance the portfolio. So I think I will keep on mentioning his quotes in my later part of presentation also. But let's start now. As I mentioned, compared to other money managers, the mutual fund managers has this particular duty of fiduciary duty. I mean, it is their for others also, like PMS manager also has a fiduciary duty, or even the family office manager has a duty towards his client, which is the promoter, family, or etc. But I think in mutual funds case, this duty is more pronounced, and that is because of the diverse set of clients we cater to, and their varied expectations. And as I mentioned, major expectation, thanks to the education which has happened over last 15-20 years, the expectation has settled, or is around consistency of returns rather than top of the chart returns. So I think, given all these things, our fiduciary duty is paramount, and it actually sits in the head when whatever decision we sort of take in terms of stock selection or portfolio construction. It is always there, even though I mean, even if it is a turnaround case in case of a stock or company, and we are hoping for a 100% return in 6 months, we just cannot make it like 8-10% of the portfolio, because ultimately such cases involve higher degree of risk. So those kind of decisions are actually influenced because we are managing people's money. Obviously, uh, with this duty, a lot of challenges come in terms of following the right sort of risk management practices, processes, and diversification required in the portfolio, etc., etc. But having done that and continuing to do that, I think it brings a lot of joy also, when you deliver the outcome, and while on the journey also is very sort of rewarding or satisfying. First, as part of this job, and as you work for a company or institution, your access to the corporates or the CEOs or CXOs or CFOs, etc., what the access you can get is unparalleled, and that teaches a lot. Basically, especially from the good managements who manages uh, the peaks and troughs of the economic or business cycle with the right degree of greed and fear, etc. That thought process teaches us a lot in terms of managing your own fund, in terms of I mean, the professional level, as well as at the personal level also. It teaches a lot. The learning can come from any kind of person. I mean, even a small distributor or a vendor can teach the way he thinks when he uh, uh, deal with the ecosystem, or his customers, or the suppliers, etc. So I think first, the job teaches us a lot, and it is a sort of, you feel you're getting enriched each day. The research, the amount of time you are spending into the research. I think a fund manager's job is always till the end is like 90% as an analyst, research analyst. I mean, I started as a research analyst, worked as a research analyst for almost 8-9 years, and then I became fund manager. But even after that, I think there is not much change in the way I work. And just 10-15% of the amount goes into fund management or the marketing related activities. I think, and it should be like that. I think 80% of the time should be going into research, analysis, and etc. etc. So that is one kind of a satisfaction we get from this job. And obviously, the second is when you see money coming into your fund, depending on the performance you are delivering or the wealth you have created over a period of time, that is immensely satisfying. When you see like daily 15-20 crore coming into your fund, so many people are trusting their money with you, with your managerial skill or the fund management skill, that is truly satisfying. I think in a way we help them achieve their goals. And I have a live example. I have seen that a mid-cap fund manager I know, he got actually a mail from a client that he invested some 3 lakh into his fund, and in just 4 years that 3 lakh become 12 lakhs or something like that, 10-12 lakhs. And it's actually built a purpose for his daughter's education. And he was thanking the fund manager for this kind of performance, etc. So I think those things also happen in our life, and those things gives us a lot of satisfaction. So I think this is one of the biggest differentiating sort of factor or aspect of a mutual fund fund manager. Now going to our next topic of uh, multi-cap fund management, or even I think this will apply to uh, uh, any category fund manager also. And basically, if you are reading this quote of Mr. Alfred Hitchcock, it's like the ideal husband understand every word his wife doesn't say. So, in a way, for us fund managers, the market becomes our second wife. And like a good husband, he tries to uh, I mean, he should be acting on some things or not acting on some things, even if told to do so by the better half. And in the same way, even if things are not told to him, he has to do and he don't have to do in some cases. So I think he has to use his experience and judgment when he has to listen to the better half and don't have to listen to the better half, even if it is told or not told. And especially if the matter is related to in-laws, etc., I think that is very pronounced. So similar situation we find ourselves many a times. Market sometimes give very confusing signals. At those signals, maybe the signal are coming, and then we have to decide to whether to act or don't act. And sometimes even if there is no sort of trend or signal from the market, then also we have to decide whether to act or not act on that information or absence of information. So I think the experience, the teamwork, the judgment, etc., comes handy, and I think this kind of skill has to be developed over a period of time. And I think what helps us and what we should do is basically a lot of reading for this. I mean, you would have heard a lot of great investors, they are like voracious readers, and from that reading and observation of things from the daily life, I think that makes our fine tuning of the judgment part or the etc etc. So I think this is one challenge, but with experience, with honing our skills through reading and observation of daily lives, etc etc, how business happens,
Atul,
I think those things help a lot.
Atul,
uh,
sorry to disturb you. I'm trying to become a good husband. So can you give an example, a quick example here, when you say that the market sometimes tells you something and sometimes doesn't.
yeah.
So a very quick example. Sorry to interrupt you, on the market, not on the wife, on the market.
Uh, so, good question, Srinivas. But actually, in this presentation, I haven't used any data or any chart or any sort of stock or company example, because obviously,
That's right. That's right.
yeah,
Yeah. So don't give a. I mean, keep it at the back of your mind
yeah.
instead of a specific company.
Mhm.
If you can relate to something has happened, let's say in plastics or in the environment, something that doesn't have a name.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
sure, thanks. So basically, currently, if you see last 3 5 years, there is an emerging trend of ESG investing, environment, safety, and governance investing. So that is coming in a big way, and because of that, many of the stocks are not performing from the basically from the cigarette or thermal power generation, or where the corporate governance standards are low, or something has happened in that company, and hence the score of ESG is low. So on the other hand, that trend is coming while the companies are trading at very attractive valuation. There is nothing sort of wrong in those companies if you look at them from the traditional point of view. They are doing very fine. Some of them are growing also. Their ROEs are very well. Cash generation is good. Valuation on our side. So basically, this valuation and the businesses are telling us that you can go ahead and buy, but this big trend of ESG investing, and because of that, I guess almost 30% of the global AUM is not going to buy or allowed to buy such stocks. So then we have to basically, these are two trends, and then we have to decide which trend to listen to. And I mean, these trends are telling us something. So I think that is one example coming to my mind as of now when
That's
you
a great
ask.
example. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so basically, we keep on facing such kind of dilemmas. I mean, something is great to buy, but there are some, I mean, outside trend which are happening. And the other example I can give is basically which has happened in the past is when this online thing started first, uh, when the online advertising started, the print media companies, even though still they are delivering some growth and delivering great ROEs and dividend yields, the stocks got derated massively. So again, one could have bought them at 6p, 7p, but still, even after that, the stocks didn't give any return. So I think these are the things I would say keep us on toes. And basically, this makes our job pretty difficult. Like one of my friend or other fund manager in other AMC said that just frustratingly that our job is very thankless. I mean, when the market does well, the fund, when the fund does well, it is because of the market doing well. And if the fund doesn't do well, then also we have to do well because we are professional fund managers. We are supposed to pick or choose right stock. So I think that is the way it happens sometimes. Uh, and also other challenges, many of the people has the benefit of this, many of these things happening with the benefit of hindsight. But the fund manager has to take the decision at that moment of time, like a ideal husband has to take when he was told to do something or not told to do something. Uh, but I would say that if the situation is very challenging, it is better to just sit tight and don't do anything and wait for the better off to calm down or the market to calm down. Automatically things get resolved. So I think in investing, not doing anything is also doing something a lot of times. So if there is no sort of way coming out in front of your eyes, I think it's better to sit tight. Yeah. So I'll move to the next slide. Uh, Again, coming back to the multi-cap funds, I think most of you would be aware that there are large cap companies, mid cap companies, small cap companies, and respectively, we can find funds or the category of funds pertaining to all these categories. As the name suggests, multi-cap have all these names or the large cap, small cap, and mid cap companies in this fund. So in that sense, it is an inclusive mandate. You will get sort of access across sectors and across market cap in through one fund, and in that sense, it can become a one-stop solution for equity exposure or the investor who is sort of approaching first time to the market, because he will get exposure to all asset classes in the equity. And on the risk reward basis also, this fund tend to do well over a period, because if you see over a long period of time of say 5, 7, 10 year, basically if you take say top 3 or top 5 funds in each category of say large cap, multi cap, mid cap, the returns somewhere converge. I mean, there can be 50 or 100 basis point different, maybe on a CAGR basis, which become big, but still not a very big difference. But in case of other categories, the volatility on the way can be higher, and where the investor lose out is basically when the drawdowns happen. That time they basically pull out the money and then they don't participate in the upside. So to that extent, to some extent, multi-cap fund can have lesser volatility compared to say pure mid-cap or small cap, etc. Sometimes even for large cap may not have that drawdowns, but they can go for a time correction, which typically happens in some large cap companies. So that way, this inclusive mandate helps in terms of a slightly better risk reward compared to other categories. And also there is a maneuverability sort of option available to the fund manager. It comes with a challenge or the responsibility, but nonetheless the option is available, and if exercised in a proper way or diligent way, it can actually help the returns in terms of shifting the some weight from large cap to mid cap or mid cap to large cap, etc., etc. So and across sector. So that option which is available, if exercised diligently, can add a lot to the fund returns. And as I mentioned, it's suitable for most of the investor portfolios and one-stop shop. And obviously, again, a quote from Mr. Lynch: "Big companies have small moves, and small companies have big moves." Like small companies actually, if managed well and the opportunity set is big, they can actually keep on growing. And as they transition to become mid cap and large cap, the re-rating also happens for this most of these companies. Like we have seen in last 1 decade, many companies which were trading at say 8, 10, 12 p now are trading at almost 20, 22 p. That is a big wealth generation from the P re-rating perspective. That happens. Obviously, Mr. Lynch sort of didn't add that small companies have big moves, but those big moves can be on both direction, positive as well as negative. So obviously that is more risky, a sort of riskier proposition, but we can deal it with proper stock selection. So this is on multi-cap, and if you're coming to the how the fund manager has to, or rather expected to function for this category is like this tiger who keep on uh, targeting his sort of yeah. So basically, other categories have restrictive mandates like large cap or mid cap. So I believe that large part of the investment process should involve elimination. Like we should be eliminating companies or from our basically investment universe, and the elimination filters can be should be around business and management. And if you eliminate company, then reduce your universe, investable universe, then the selection actually or such kind of selection actually gives much better risk reward for the investor. So for other categories, the fund manager don't have to sort of worry, because when the mandate is large cap, automatically the entire universe of mid and small cap, you don't have to worry. And within those, say, 100 or 150 companies, he has to select 30, 40, 50 companies for his portfolio. So to that extent, the challenge sort of becomes narrower, and also the outcome can be better. And similar thing happens in the mid cap or small cap space, because they don't have to worry about mid large cap, and complete focus goes on mid cap stock selection. So that does away a lot of noise or sort of waste of time which happens while you sort of try to marry the both. So in multi cap, we have to sort of marry the bottom up approach. Obviously it is the starting approach for any investment, so it has to be there. But to some extent we have to bring in the top down approach also, because market and economies have cycles, and accordingly this sectoral or the large cap or mid cap stocks does behave in a particular cycle. So if the economy is expansionary and growing at, say, a very good growth rate, obviously mid cap small cap will do well, and vice versa. So we have to take this into consideration while allocation. uh, but at the same time, I will maintain that the starting point is a bottom up stock selection. I mean, if if you are not sure about the business and management, then there is no point in going into any company, even if the economy is looking very bright. I mean, such companies can go up to certain extent, but they definitely make some mistake, and you lose whatever you lose out on the entire gains in just 3 6 months, which you have gained in, say, last 2 3 years, etc. I think this category requires some kind of this mixed approach. And then as the fund will have, say, maybe 30 40 large cap companies and maybe 20 30 mid and small, these companies or this also require varying degrees of sort of depth of research. Obviously, most of the fund manager become fund manager after being analyst, and they have looked at companies as an analyst, etc. And many of the large cap companies are pretty well researched. I mean, you get report from sell side brokerages routinely, and then they're the CEOs and CFOs keep on coming on television interviews, and in magazines and newspaper also a lot of information keep on coming for them. So anyway, you develop a sense on these companies, and you know these companies, their business model, etc., etc. So the call is basically about the identifying the DNA of the company, and if you are sure about that it is good, then you can basically left with the economy or market cycle and the valuation call. But in mid cap and small cap, I think the approach to research is pretty different and in depth. I mean, you have to start with meeting the promoters and the second or third line in the company, and then you have to visit the plants or stores, etc., to get the feel and keep on verifying or checking what they have said and whether it is matching, etc. We have to uh, uh, take a feedback from their vendors, etc. So, and also looking at last 5 10 years history, how the margins have behaved, the return ratios have behaved, the capital allocation by these companies, etc. So the depth is slightly more for such companies. So obviously we have to do both these things. Uh, then once you have identified the mid cap or small cap. Obviously, the execution challenges are there compared to large cap because the volumes traded in such stocks or scripts are obviously lesser. And when you require to build a position, it poses a challenge in terms of impact cost. Sometimes you don't end up building a position within your limit price limit, and then you have to wait for that price to come, or the performance of the company to catch up to again buy such or the load onto such position. So there are such challenges, and the challenge is more on the selling or exit side. I mean, you can get entry into these stocks, but exit are typically difficult because if something goes wrong at the economy level uh, or at a macro level, the stock just take a plunge and then you don't get an exit. So the way to deal with is basically, if your company selection is right in first place, then we can sit with such companies and probably wherever you are confident, you can actually add in such corrections. So that is the way we can overcome these execution challenges. Keep on waiting for the right time, and when the time comes, don't get fearful and just grab the opportunity like this. I mean, these animals do when they hunting, when they are hunting, and obviously discipline and agility. So I will come to this topic in the next slides, but and I will, but obviously discipline and patience in investing is obviously are much more celebrated virtues of any investor, and I don't deny that they are very important. But I think to some extent, a mutual fund manager has to be open and agile, open to new ideas, or open to the trends which are coming in, and also agile in terms of action. Because as I said, the consistency of returns is expected, and also it is when I say consistency, it is unfortunately judged with the relative performance also. It is not only consistency in the sense 8 or 6 or 8% returns every year, etc. That is also there. Plus, we are not we are expected to deliver in line with the set of performing funds in a relative terms also. So to that extent, these are the challenges and for a mutual fund manager. So again, coming to the discipline part and agility part. So again, I thought relevant for the present situation, Saudhani Hati, Durgatna Gati. So you have to be alert always, otherwise there can be accident. So we have to sort of keep track of things always about what is happening around, and particularly related to your investee company. So better way is to have a checklist and keep on looking at that checklist every 3, 6, 12 months, whether the things are going right and whether the company is doing right things or the management is doing right things. So this is the way I think to avoid any accident. And in that sense, when you see things changing, uh, and obviously you have to analyze first whether it's a temporary thing or a sort of medium term or permanent thing, and then maybe you should not be afraid to act on it, act on the decision to reduce or add to any position, because I think we all know the price correction, but I will come to the time correction also in the maybe next slide or after that. But that is also a big wealth or the value destroyer. And I think to avoid this kind of correction, keeping track of things is very important. What was the initial hypothesis of investment? Uh, and if that hypothesis is going right, you can just stay invested with the company, even if it is sort of gone up in price by say maybe 50%, 100%. It doesn't matter. I will again come back to the valuation perspective. At least I have, and I learned it on the job. Uh, I have seen many investors or the fund managers exiting positions at say 50% profit or 80% profit, despite companies delivering very well on the on all fronts, growth as well as return ratios as well as cash generation, etc. Uh, because the returns has come in like say 1 year or so, but after that, over a period of next 8, 10 years, I have seen such stocks becoming like 50x or 80x also in our market itself in last 10 years. And there are many examples. So I think it when I say keeping track of things, it doesn't mean that we have to act on any small thing, but obviously we have to keep on looking at things. And again, uh, as Srinivas asked the question, I will again mention one example. Like regulatory overhang is a big thing for the which impacts the stock performance. So current example is basically on the gas companies. There are some regulatory changes which are about to happen, and that's why even when the consumption is going and the next 10 years India is supposed to increase the gas consumption manifold and all those things, the stocks actually are getting derated because uh, there are concerns about the regulatory changes which are coming, probably will come in. So I think we have to obviously keep track of things. Again, I'm not saying that we have to act, but as long as you feel that the company will deliver despite changes, then you can stay with that company. But if it is otherwise, then you should not be afraid to reduce the position and shift to better opportunities, because time is also money, and opportunity cost also drags the portfolio returns to a large extent. So yeah, the next slide. This slide is about time correction, and it is like this bonsai which I found the picture. Time correction, as I mentioned, it is actually I found that it is a bigger evil than the price correction. Price correction basically means a stock price falling by 20-40%, but time correction is basically means that stock price going nowhere for say 2-3 or even 8-10 years. So I think that is a bigger well destroyed, because you could have deployed that capital into some other opportunities and made their good money. So I think this is also a big thing to watch for investors. Like whatever good this bonsai tree is looking, you are not going to get a shade or fruits from this tree. So similarly, even when some of the stocks are looking very good in terms of valuation or growth or say cash generation, etc., because of some reasons like maybe ESG investing, the trend is there, or government or regulatory overhang, etc., or maybe capital allocation mistakes which the company is doing. So even if it is looking maybe cheap on valuation, because the capital allocation mistakes are happening, such companies don't perform for long period of time. And in our in our own market, there are a lot of examples. I mean, uh, uh, first of all, there is no investments which is happening because of ESG in cigarette companies, and then some companies are going into various other business lines. So many people don't like such capital misallocation. So that is the reason for some of these kind of stocks go for a time correction. So I think this also one has to look at very with a very focused way and avoid such or weed out such stocks from the portfolio, because again I think there is a phase from Mr. Buffett, Warren Buffett, that uh, weeding, sort of watering the weeds and plucking out the flowers. That is what again a behavioral mistake happens. Like we don't want to sell a position which has not given any return or which is actually in loss, and we actually tend to sell positions which have delivered some returns, because you don't feel guilty while selling those profitable positions, but actually that is the mistake, big mistake which happens. And I think the most common reasons for such kind of time correction which happen in most of the stocks is basically, the largest reason I would say, or the biggest reason I would say, is the capital misallocation by the management. It may happen that at the peak of the cycle, the management becomes greedy and goes for a very big capacity expansion. So that is also a type of a capital misallocation at wrong time. And similarly, there are companies which are doing in very well in one business, generating great amount of cash, but they decide to enter into second, third, fourth line of business, and sometimes it takes a lot many years for those businesses to fructify, and sometimes those business don't even fructify and takes down the whole company with them. So those kind of risks exist because of capital misallocation. And as I mentioned, there can be sort of time correction because of regulatory overhang or continuous government intervention in that sector or that company, etc. Obviously, people don't want to have those kind of uncertainties, so people don't tend to invest into such companies. And then there are trends, new trends or innovation trends which happen. Like when I already mentioned ESG. Now the new trend which is coming is basically electric vehicles and lithium-ion batteries. So uh, there can be a case that if that becomes economical at a scale in say next 1 or 2, 3 years, the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles or the part suppliers to those OE companies or even traditional lead battery companies, they might keep on delivering on the numbers or the results because there is demand will be there on the ground, but these newer trends will be there in the investors' mind, and hence the companies might go for derating. So again, I'm not saying that they will conclusively saying that they will go for a derating, etc. But this one risk one has to keep in mind because large part of the, I mean, all of you will be very well be knowing that the large part of the company's value comes from the intrinsic value and the growth rate, perpetual growth rate, etc. And when such kind of innovations come or the disruptions comes, obviously the first hit is on the intrinsic value of the company or the future value of the company, and hence this company starts getting re-rated. So these are the factors go behind the time correction. So we have to be aware of such things. Again, I think this is about noise. I think we keep on getting so much information every day, and we have to filter that information before jumping to any conclusion. So again, here I'm advocating basically discipline and patience rather than agility and openness. So I think that is a very fine balance we have to find while managing money. Obviously, when such noise happens, I think typically I have seen that noise is basically war-like situation or geopolitical situation, or in some of the very well-established companies when the succession planning is about to happen. There is so much noise that who will be the next person, whether he can fill the shoes of the predecessor, and whether he will disturb the culture, and whether people will exit, etc. So rather than focusing on the strength of the franchise and the process part, etc., etc., we got disturbed by this kind of noise, and sometimes we make mistake undermining the value or the strength of the franchise. So I think this kind of noise one has to avoid. uh, and the second part of this noise or fallout is basically the jumping jacks or the trading behavior. uh, uh, you would have seen people at the railway stations, etc. They keep on changing the queues, and the person who keep on changing the queues ultimately lands up the person who gets the ticket the last. So I think that is the same case in term of high churn. Basically, if you keep on jumping from one stock to another, sometimes you avoid the big sort of miss the big upside which is there from particular stock, and end up settling for a less kind of a lesser kind of a upside. So I think that is one problem with this kind of behavior, and also it also causes a lot of impact on the fund. Like if the say some funds can have 100% churn, that is basically they are completely changing the portfolio in 1 year. But if you calculate, such kind of churn can cause almost 70 to 100 basis point performance to the fund. And typically funds deliver, depending on the market, 8, 10, 12% return. And out of that, if 1% is going, that is like 10%, 10% of the returns you are sort of wasting in this kind of churn behavior. So I think so here comes the discipline and patient part, but at the same time, as I again coming back, that we have to be open and agile to the new trends and the changes that management is bringing into the company. So basically, the slide combining all these things, what I mentioned, discipline has to be there, patience has to be there in investing. It's not that the stock has gone 20% up or 50% up. You need to sell it. You have to evaluate again. And if management is not making a mistake, the growth opportunities exist, I think we should stay invested in such companies. And obviously, process is required, is important for uh, everybody, but also for the mutual fund manager. And because we work in teams and there are analysts and fund managers with diverse experience, etc., we it actually helps in building a holistic kind of approach to the investment. And as I mentioned, again coming to openness and agility, I spoke a lot. And ultimately, we have to respect to Mr. Market. Like we have to listen to our better halves. We have to listen to what Mr. Market is saying. Over a medium to long term, I'm not saying in the short term, because there is a saying in Hindi that "Bhav Bhagwan hai." So the ticker itself keeps on telling you something. And if the stock is not doing well, despite having all right ingredients, so we have to look at whether some broader change, broader trend is impacting the performance. So in that sense, I'm saying we have to respect Mr. Market. So again, multi-cap investing. Again, the question I was asked by, I am getting asked by distributors and the product approval teams, etc. View on large cap companies and mid cap, etc. From time to time. And my boring answer to them, all of them, is basically, for me, as a starting point, a company is a good company or a bad company. I use the word subpar here, but actually it's a good company or a bad company. And if it is a bad company, why sort of break your head, whether it's a large cap or a mid cap? Anyway, it should not be there in your portfolio. And if it is a good company, you can look at the medium term growth opportunities, the valuation, all those things, and take your exposure. So the first filter is, I think the elimination filter should be based on the good or bad company, and not actually the large or mid or small size of the company. Because in many subsectors, there are very good leaders and winning companies or winning businesses in those subsectors. So I think that one has to keep in mind. This is the way I basically have managed the multi-cap fund and still managing. So basically, typically I allocate 60-70% to large cap and 30-40% to mid cap and small cap companies. There is no rocket science, or there is no science behind this. Again, learning on the job, and this suited me, so I am doing that. Uh, also, I have an investment approach of investing into quality and growing companies, which I call as business management and growth. And that sort of portfolio is 70-80% of the portfolio for me. So I use this again 80-20 approach. So 80% core holdings, which where I'm confident about the sort of management and business, etc. And 20% I will also look at turnaround opportunities or sectoral opportunities or some broad themes, etc. But that will not cross like, doesn't cross like 20-25%. So that is one. Investment philosophy, as I mentioned, I have framework, and then accordingly, I will buy and sit on those quality businesses. But again, I will obviously keep on tracking the changes, the broad macro changes, as well as what the company is doing, and I will stay invested, not worrying so much about the price, even if it is going sharply in short span of time. And if at all corrections are there, I think that is a good opportunity to average down the cost. This is the approach. At least, see, there are different approaches to investment, and the goal is, there is one goal. There are a lot of things I've written and spoken about: growth investing, growth at reasonable price and value, etc. For me, I look at these three things in any business or any company. The business has to be good, management has to be good, and there is growth visibility. And I need not explain, I think, on the business part. It is, you would be knowing it very well, probably better than me. Management also, I think you would be knowing it better than me. But I will emphasize on this part of capital allocation, that is very important. And growth is also important. Some people or investors tend to argue that if even if the temporary or medium term growth is not there, but the valuation is right, the stock can give returns. But I think it is a game of patience, and when the returns are about to come, just before that, many times you lose patience and sell out the such stocks. So I think that is there are such kind of challenges in those investing. And basically, the world has changed and changing a lot. There are regulatory risks, governmental risks. Uh, Political leaders are not shy to take drastic actions. There is a technology risk. There has been so much money pumping has happened in last 12 years. So they basically economic uh, recovery, etc., is fragile to that extent. So the point is, there is a lot of volatility and will remain there. So in this kind of environment, I would take the risk of valuation. I'm willing to take the risk of buying expensive stock, but I just don't want to take the risk of buying of an average business or a average management company, because if these things are not up to the mark, and any such kind of volatile episode happens, the business can actually go down a lot, and then the recovery can be very painful. So I think it's at least this has worked to me, and hence I'm following. I think in investing, it is also very important is to identify your traits and what suits you, and keep on following that and try to sort of mastering that art. Uh, if you try to dabble here and there like a jumping jack, it will not serve the purpose. So stock selection, I have already mentioned the BMG approach, and uh, uh, there are a lot of modes said around brands and distribution and cost structure, etc., etc. But what I have observed, at least in Indian context, is execution is the real mode, and if the execution is right, the companies and management can build businesses, build brands, build distribution, build cost structure. But if the execution is not right, or the culture or DNA of the company is not right, these things, even if they are there, they can be destroyed in just 2 3 years, because competition is such fierce. There are vultures in the forms of competition, and if you sleep just for 3 months, 12 months, the competition comes and takes the share from you. So I think execution, unrelentless execution is the real mode. And as I mentioned, terminal value also comes from this kind of management and DNA. And I think investors are becoming discerning over the period of last 10, 20, 30 years in terms of separating men from boys. And that is what happening in terms of polarization of market. You see certain stocks are delivering very good returns and certain stocks are not participating in it directly. That is because I think the competitive positioning of these companies are changing, and I think the managements of such companies are this is the sole reason for such separation, and the hence the polarization in the stock performances. Again, valuation perspective, I already mentioned that I don't mind buying expensive companies and sitting onto that, because the world is such that there are so many risks in terms of volatile commodity prices, financial markets, technology, government risk, regulatory risk, etc., etc. So I will better be with good quality companies where management can deal with the changes, and actually there are most of these management who can deal with the changes. They actually make their companies benefit from such changes. So I think that is very important. And growth is also important, and those managements are delivering on growth, because without growth many issues crop up, like your positioning in the marketplace or the ecosystem. Obviously, a lot of vendors, distributors, etc., they want to work with a growing and winning company. So it's like money feeds into money, so that kind of thing happens. So I think growth is important, and hence I would say that valuation risk, one should not bother so much. One has to keep an eye on that, and if the company slips, then obviously you have to take quick actions. And as I mentioned, following things are actually accentuating this trend. So volatility, ESG investing, relative positioning, which I already mentioned, that some companies are becoming very strong. Then there is liquidity, and interest rates are obviously there. One can debate on these topics, but I think they are also uh, serious factors, and probably they are going to be here for next maybe foreseeable future. The the uh, the time in which this liquidity has been pumped into the system, I think in last 6 months or maybe 2 years, the time to take out or withdraw this liquidity will be much longer. So to that extent, I think asset prices will have support from this kind of liquidity. And in a way, I would say it is becoming a new fundamental when you assess the macroeconomic parameters. So I think, as I mentioned, we have to be open-minded and agile. So I think this is one element at the macro level, I would say one has to accept and not creep about. Again, portfolio construction for a mutual fund side, I think I don't take cash call, because my investors take that takes that call whether to invest in equity or debt or gold or whatever. So I don't take cash calls. It is just to the extent of cash management purposes of buying some stock and selling some stock, etc. Obviously, I diversify across sectors and stocks. There is no again science behind this. I typically use 50, 60, 65 stocks, limit myself on the lower side and higher side also. But that is the way it has worked. Peter Lynch used to have 1400 stocks at one point of time. So I don't think there is any science behind it, though there are a lot of theories that beyond the point diversification doesn't solve the problem, etc. But I think whatever works for him or her, I think he should follow that. I think that is the only one answer or only one thing I have learned on the job. And then uh, mix of all size companies and basically if you can uh, find, I will come to the risk management on the next. So if you can find the uh, less correlation between stocks and sector and how build your portfolio, obviously the risk management improves. And the thing is that first level defense is know what you're buying. If you're buying a right company, then you're, I think you will be through. Along with this other techniques of diversification, weight allocation and discipline, open process, following process, etc. And obviously we have to sort of avoid these mistakes of conviction versus bias. I mean, many people start a position with a lot of conviction, it plays out, but after a point, that conviction turns into a bias. And I think there is a very fine line or thin line between that when it happens. And we don't come to understand that when that happens, and we sort of continue with the hypothesis, even if there are cracks in that hypothesis. So I think we have to avoid that. We have to avoid these episodes of greed and fear. And some people are actually perma bull to some extent. I am also perma bull. I remain optimistic. I say that one has to be optimistic and have this even bigger picture, which I said on the Peter Lynch slide. But I think one has to balance between these two things also, because a perma bear will also keep on missing the upside, and that is also not good. So here I comes to the end of my presentation, and I think Srinivas, if there are questions I can take, or I think uh, I would just thanks everyone here and thanks for this patient listening.
This has been a wonderful presentation and talk. And we've almost run out of time, but so we've got more than, maybe 20, 30 questions, and both Divya and Sanjeev Patni, or, our members, they have given questions in advance that I've shared with you. So can I suggest one thing, Atul, request one thing. We'll try to cover as many questions as possible, but limit your answer to just 30 seconds. Is that okay?
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So let me go, very quickly.
Yeah.
By far the biggest question people are asking is, the recent change. How will it affect you? It's being asked by many people. Shardul, Shaza, Divya, and Agreem. Shardul has a more interesting spin. Do you see more regulatory changes, affecting active management?
Yeah, I think the regulatory environment is evolving and it will continue to evolve. And I won't say it is it's a challenge, but I think it's a good thing to happen, at least from the investors' point of view. And it will, if it is good for investors, it will be good for the fund management industry also eventually. In this case, what has happened in case of multi-cap, regulator is just asking us to be true to label in terms of multi-cap fund. So we have to do a proper allocation to all asset classes. So I think industry has made representation in terms of practicability of this circular. So we have industries waiting for a clarification from SEBI in terms of what they say, or if there are any relaxations, etc. So depending on that, I think most of the fund houses will decide the future course in the best interest of investors. But I will again come back from my perspective to the point that for me, is a company is a good company or a bad company before it is being called as a large company or a mid company or a small size company. And I think execution wise, I think given a proper time frame to make changes, I think we can overcome this kind of challenge.
Fantastic. I'm going to tweet about your. I'm going to tweet about your one-liners. And as Naveen has pointed out, your slides have been fantastic. So the second question, quick answer, if you can please, Atul. What is the role of quants in your or quantitative techniques in your portfolio management style?
Yeah. So when I mention this framework of business management, etc., so I use some of the quantitative filters like last 3 year, 5 year, average growth rate or ROC and ROE, etc., or the CFO to EBITDA ratio, etc., etc. So which are, I'm sure this audience would be knowing very well. So these are the typical traditional filters I would look at from the business perspective. So that is the way I look at the businesses from the quant perspective. But once the selection happens or the elimination happens on the basis of this quant, it is up to the judgment. I mean, we have to come to the judgment whether the business positioning is becoming strong or not. Because what is happening in last 3-5 years is some of the companies are not able to uh, uh, come out of this filter because environment has been very challenging post demonetization, GST,
Right.
and etc. So in such cases, we have to look through the reasons, and then even if one or two parameters are not satisfied, then also you have to take such call. So I think it's a combination of quantitative as well as qualitative.
So checklists, you got, you seem to be saying checklists seem to be playing a big role. Do you have a checklist for each company? Is it by sector? And where do you maintain those checklists? On the computer, how do you work?
Yeah. So basically, the broad level checklist will be applicable to each and every company, which is basically what I mentioned about. Again, sorry, boring you again with that framework of business management and growth. The same thing, whether government intervention is there. If it is yes, tend to avoid that. If it is very capital intensive, mostly avoid that. Corporate governance, avoid that, or it is etc. So that is applicable to all sort of companies. And then at the sector level, obviously, if the banking company or the NBFC is there, there are different parameters like rather than say ROC, ROA will be there, or cost to income will be there. So we have to keep on looking at these things. And again, that frequency of 6-12 months, we have to look at what actions management is taking. If at the peak of the cycle they are going for a big capex, that is gives a sort of a red signal. So those kind of things are there in the checklist, but obviously we have to customize it for yourself. What works for me may not work for you in terms of stock selection, but broadly the it will remain same.
Right. So Sanjeev has asked if a high conviction stock continues to underperform, what is your thinking? How do you deal with it? Does your boss ask you anything? What is your thinking on that?
Yeah, so in certain high conviction stocks, actually they test your conviction level in terms of when the 6-9 months become very difficult. So in that, again, we have to keep on going to the checklist and keep on checking your hypothesis whether the company will survive and continue to grow. So again, one example I will give is basically currently because of this online retailing which is coming, lot of offline retailers are coming into question, and I have some of the conviction idea from that space, and people are making a case that they may not be able to grow as envisaged, etc. So, etc., etc. So, the that's the way I think we have to keep on asking questions yourself, and if the answer is coming out to be yes, I think we can stay with the position. Otherwise, we have to be open and agile to sort of trim the position or exit the position. I think we
Yeah.
cannot fall in love with the stock or marry the stock.
Peter Lynch says that if you are wrong on IBM, nobody is going to blame you. But if you are wrong on a small name, people are going to say, "Why have you stuck your neck?" Is that culture there in India as well?
Yeah, I think, as I said, these rules are universal. Whether
Okay.
good rules or bad rules, they are universal. So if you goof up on a small company, obviously that blame falls on the fund manager largely. And if a large company doesn't perform, it's a problem with the company.
Right. You mentioned about the big picture and even bigger picture. So, is there a bigger picture? So, you've got the big picture, where COVID is affecting us, and there's geopolitics. The bigger picture is mankind has survived. What is the bigger picture?
I think, frankly, we don't have to worry about bigger picture because we will not outlive
Okay,
that.
fine.
So,
Yeah.
I think, as I mentioned, I think it's finding a balance of conviction and between conviction and bias, big picture and even bigger picture, or discipline versus agility. So, I think there is no one answer, but I think. Bigger picture, I would sort of can't sort of give any concrete answer
Sure.
or example for that.
No, so sure, sure. So Atul, that ties in with the next question Sanjeev had. See, there's a very high PE ratio, right? I heard VC talk a few days back. He was from Loom Ventures. He's saying that we are looking at ratios, we are looking at price by book, but book has lost its meaning. So has valuation lost its meaning? What is your sense? A very quick answer, if you are insight into your thinking.
Yeah. So I already sort of to some extent clarified that I am okay with buying expensive companies and holding on to it, but it is not possible that valuation will lose its meaning.
It will not.
I
Okay,
think
great.
valuation will always be a one aspect to stay invested or book profits, etc. And if not from the absolute point of view, but at least from a mutual fund point of view, if the stock is becoming very expensive, we can always have alternatives and options which are similar alternatives at lower prices. So obviously, one has to take actions at those point of time.
But are
So
you sensing there's a shift in the way valuations are being done?
yeah, I think all boats are getting lifted because of this liquidity, and also, as I mentioned, investors are becoming discerning. So they are giving more importance to corporate governance and ESG factors and the way the positioning of the company, how it is evolving. So if these things are falling in place, such companies are getting rewarded in terms of free rating. So I think to that extent, all boats are getting lifted in this. So I would say in India, when people ask me what's the view on market, I say that there are two markets in India. One market which is doing well and one market which is not doing well. It is applicable globally also. One market or one set of companies do well. So that set of companies which are doing well, I think valuation has gone higher, but still I don't think, I mean, sort of very problem there as
Sure.
such.
So Divya had a question. How do you test your strategies? I mean, do you get to test your strategies? Has it happened that do you back test, or what are your thoughts? Very quickly.
So I think when you look at this kind of framework or strategy, obviously just like that, you can observe the kind of companies which have survived, done well, and how much wealth they have created. Like again, going back to Lynch, he used to buy or find out company visiting malls and what his children were buying and etc. So that way, I think whether the strategy is working or not, we can observe from the real life, and the stocks actually done well. And even if you do back testing on those stocks or in the market, I think the companies with this kind of strength or positioning or the financial they have delivered. Ultimately, those companies only come up on the screen in terms of wealth creation. So I think it is very easy to look back and check whether the strategies are working or not.
Right. So I'm coming towards the end of our questions. Many people have asked, actually, what does your day look like? I mean, you mentioned 80% you like to think of yourself as an analyst.
Yeah.
What does your day look like? Peter Lynch has said that by nature investing is an anxious business. So how do you handle stress?
Yeah. So on the
Do you
stress
have any
part,
stress?
sorry.
Do you have any stress?
Yeah, that's the point I was coming. I think, I mean, I many of the time I didn't find that problem to a large extent, because if you like a field or what you are doing very much, or that is your passion, I think you start enjoying that rather than taking it as a stress. And I think in our case or fund manager's case, nobody sort of can give us stress over and above what we ourselves are taking. It's not that my boss can pressurize me if my performance is down, because myself will come under pressure because of what has happened, and I will start taking rectifying steps or corrective steps. So that is on the stress, I think. And once you see those cycles many times in, say, over a period of your career, you sort of get accustomed to it. So that is on the stress part, I think. And in the way the day goes, I think a lot has changed in last 6 months. It is not because we are all operating from home. So, but otherwise, I think it is about attending the morning meeting, because all of us, the team as a whole, keep on meeting the management, the vendors, the distributors, etc., etc., and We then keep on sharing the feedback to each other. We keep on asking questions. And once we are in office, so this calls typically happens on phone while we travel, commute. And once we reach office, there obviously there can be a one or two line of meetings with the management or a good analyst, etc. And typically maybe 4 or 5 days in a month or 2 days in a month, we end up visiting the clients or companies in their offices in other cities, etc. So and other and what is left is basically goes into reading, a lot of reading. I think reading is very important for this profession.
Fantastic. So what are the two books you would recommend our audience to read?
Okay. The same book, One Up on the Wall Street by Peter Lynch. I think I still read I've read this book many times, but every weekend I just open randomly 4 or 5 pages and read it and just skip it again.
Yeah.
So that is one. And I think there is one book on philosophy called The Daily Stoic by Ryan Einstein. So that one book is basically pieces written by the Greek or Roman philosophers and for each day, and they have explained the meaning of that. So I think those kind of books are I find them interesting. So to read.
Very nice. So Daily Stoic, SQIC Stoic, and One Up on the Wall Street.
Yeah.
And we are also waiting a book from you, Atul. Thank you so very much for your presentation and talk. It was wonderful to have you. Thank you so very much again. Thank you all for listening in today. Bye-bye.
Copyright 2020. All rights reserved. This program is designed to give accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is distributed with the understanding that CFA Institute is not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, tax, investment, or other expert advice. If legal advice or other expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought.